Hey everyone, in today's video, I'm going to show you how to integrate Stripe checkout with Flask. So I made this video a few years ago, but since then Stripe has changed their entire checkout process. So I thought I'd make a new video showing you how to do it with the new version of Stripe checkout. So before you can even follow this tutorial, you need to make sure you have a Stripe account and you're going to be using your test credentials. And if you go to API keys over here, you'll be able to see your test keys and make sure they have test in it for the tokens. You'll also need the command line interface installed. So I'll give you a link to the documentation for installing the command line interface. And once you install the command line interface, make sure you log in. So basically you just call Stripe login. And what's going to happen is it's going to open up a browser window where you can log into your Stripe account and then basically connect your command line interface with your Stripe account so you can run commands from your command line interface. So once you have those two things, you can follow the tutorial. So we're going to be following this process roughly for checkout, and I'll show you how to adopt it all for Flask. And I'll link this in the description below as well so you can follow along with this. So to start, I already have my app running. It has a basic product page where you can click buy now, and it also has a thank you page. So if I go to /thanks, you see thank you. So this isn't going to do anything special. It's just a page. This first one is where pretty much everything is happening. So for my code, I have these two routes already, and obviously I have Flask installed. And you also want to install Stripe, so pip install Stripe. And I already have it installed. And once you do that, we can start working on getting the payments integrated. So first, you want to add in your tokens for your public key and your secret key for Stripe. So I'll just add them to my configuration. So I'll say Stripe public key, and then I'll have one for secret. So Stripe underscore secret key, and then I'll add them as strings here, and then we'll be using them. So if I go over to my dashboard, look at my keys. So I have the publishable key, and I'll put this in public. And then I have the secret key, which I can reveal by just clicking that. And I'll put them in secret. So like I said, make sure they both have tests because we're just doing these on the test account. Once you have these two things, then we can kind of start following the process of adding checkout. So first, set up Stripe. So I already did that. So pip install Stripe. Next, what we want to do is we want to create a product. So obviously, if the user is going to be giving you money, they're going to give you money for something, and that is a product in Stripe. So if you go here on your Stripe dashboard to the left-hand side where it says products, you can create a new product, and I'll do that now. Give it a name, so the product, and description, let's say the best product ever. Also, give it a price and a frequency, so one time or recurring. For this video, I'll just use one time, and I'll set it to be $99. And then once you do that, you can just hit Save Product at the top right-hand corner. And it's going to take you to the actual product page. So we'll come back here. Let's go back to the documentation. So we created the product. Next thing we have to do is we create a checkout session. So the checkout session is what's going to allow us to start the process to take someone's money. So if I copy the code here, so I'll just take everything here and I'll copy it into my index route. So we'll put it here in index, and I'll show you two versions of this. The first one, we're going to put it directly in index, and the second version, I'm going to do like an API call to the server so we can get this through Ajax. But first, we'll put it in index. So let me just indent everything. I'm going to move this call to stripe.api key outside of the route because I'll be using it for the command line interface stuff with the webhooks later. So let me just put that up here. So Stripe API key equals app config secret key. So we see it's the same as the one. It should be the same, but it isn't. But Stripe secret key here is the one that we want. And now let me explain what's going on with the session. So let me indent everything first. So when we create a session, we have to specify the payment type. So we're going to be using a credit card here. Stripe has some other payment methods, and you can easily change it to be those payment methods as well. But for our purposes, we're going to keep it on cart. The most important part are the line items. So the line items represent all the things that the buyer will be paying for. So I've already created one product, and this price ID is what I want to update. So if I go over to the dashboard again, we see that under pricing, we have an API ID. This is what we want. So the product has an ID. We don't want the product ID. We want the actual pricing ID because each product can have multiple prices. So we'll just put that here. And also the quantities. So I can change this to be like 5 if I wanted to, but I'll leave it as 1. And if you had more items, you can add them to this list here. So imagine you were building this for like a checkout cart. Then the user can put multiple things in the cart with multiple quantities, and then you can add those all here. But for simplicity purposes, I'm just going to leave it as 1 for the single product and price that I created. The mode is going to be payment. And then for the success URL, this is going to be our server. And I'm going to change this to be URL4 instead of example. So let me import URL4. And I'll start with a cancel URL. So for cancel URL, I'll just redirect them back to the index. So to do that, I'll say URL4 index. And because this is supposed to be an external URL, I have to do underscore external equals true. So that's going to generate the full URL and just instead of just the endpoint. Then I need to do something similar for the success URL, but it needs to be slightly different. So I'll show you first the thanks part and then the external equals true. So that's the same, but I need to add this second part to it. The part where it has session ID equals checkout session ID. I need to add this directly because when I have those brackets inside of URL4, it's going to convert those for me, and I don't want that to happen. So this is for Stripe, these brackets. So I'll make this a string. And now it's going to concatenate the URL for thanks along with this query string for session ID. Because what happens is after user submits their payment, they get redirected to this thank you page along with a session ID in the URL. And from there, you can do something with the session ID. I won't be doing anything with it in this video, but you could if you wanted to because it's going to be there. And I'll show you that when we get to that point. So I have the session ID in there, and I have the cancel URL. So now that I have this session created, what I need to do is I need to send it to the template because there's going to be a little bit of JavaScript involved. So I'm going to create a variable called, let's say session, let's say checkout session ID. And this is going to be equal to the session ID. So this session is the one created from Stripe checkout session.create. I also need to pass my public key. So I'll call this checkout public key. And this is going to come from my configuration. So this is going to be app.config Stripe public key. So let me add that here. Let me move these down so it's a little easier to read. So we have the checkout public key. And then that's it. That all gets returned in the template. And like I said, there are a couple of ways of doing this. The first is to pass everything to the template here. A second approach, which I'll do later, is using Ajax to get these. Because there's going to be a downside to doing it this way, and I'll show you that in a moment. But I pass those to the template, and this is the template here. So if we go back to the documentation for the checkout process, I've already created a session. Next thing I want to do is I want to redirect to checkout. So first I need to install or just import the Stripe library in my JavaScript to be used in JavaScript, I should say. So down here, what I can do is I can just say script source equals, and then, you know, the Stripe stuff. Then what I'll do is I'll create a separate file. So script source, and I'll call this script.js. How about this? Script no Ajax. No Ajax.js, because I'll have a second version for Ajax, and I'll go ahead and create this over here. So script-no Ajax.js, and in here I'm going to write the code for Stripe. And let's go back here. We need to initialize Stripe with the public key. So I'll just copy this, and this needs to go into the index. So before I load this script, I'm going to have this. So script, and in here, I'll have the Stripe object. And the reason why I'm doing it here is because I'll have access to the variables that I passed. So checkout session ID and checkout public key. So checkout public key is going to go here. And actually what I'll do is I'll instantiate Stripe inside of the script, but I'll set the variable here. So the variable is called this. I copy that twice. Checkout public key. So checkout public key is the public key that I'm passing from the backend. And this needs to be inside of the curly brackets because it's Jinja. And this is going to be a string. And I'll name it checkout public key as well. And I can make this a constant if I want. So const checkout public key. And I'll also do the same thing for the session ID. So checkout session ID is going to be equal to the checkout session ID that comes from the routes. So I can put the colons there. And then these two things will be available inside of my script. So now I can take that checkout public key, which is now a variable, and I can pass it to Stripe here, just like that. Because these two are related. The script here and the script here are going to be run at the same time. So anything that I have before the script no Ajax will be available inside of script no Ajax. So that's why I'm using it there, the checkout public key. Now what I want to do is I want to get that button that I have on the screen because I'm going to do something when I click it. So I have the ID buy now button. So what I can do is like const button equals documents query selector. And I want to select the buy now button. And then I can add an event listener to that button. So anytime the user clicks that button, I want to activate the Stripe stuff. So button, add event listener. I want to add the click event. And then doesn't have to take anything other than the event. And inside of here is where I want to do the Stripe stuff. So let's go back to the documentation. And it's pretty simple. We basically just call the Stripe object and call the method redirect to checkout on it. And we just have to pass the session ID. So I'll copy this and I'll put it into my code. So copy that there. And what I want to do is I want to update the session ID. So this should be the checkout session ID. So remember, I have the variable here in the index. So checkout session ID, and I can put it here. So because this is JavaScript, I can just drop that in there like that. And everything should work. So let's try running this and see if I made any mistakes. So I'll go to my store, refresh the page. And we see Stripe is not defined. That's a pretty easy mistake to fix. I just need to import Stripe. So import Stripe here at the top. And now let's try running this again. And we see the product page. And if I click buy now, does it redirect me? And it doesn't. So let me open up the developer tools and go to the console. And I can kind of see what happens. So it says loading failed for the script with source script no Ajax, and that's a pretty easy thing to fix. So because I'm using Flask, the script won't just simply be in script no Ajax from this file's location. So I have to use URL4. So it's going to be URL4, and then this is a static file. The file name is going to be that script no Ajax.js. So I could just put quotes around it like that, and then I can close out the URL4. So I have my script no Ajax file inside of my static directory. So this URL4 is just going to get it. So let's try that again. Refresh. It looks like it loaded this time. So click buy now. So let's see, we have this template syntax error somewhere. We have render templates is not working. And that's simply because I forgot the closing Jinja brackets. So another easy mistake to fix. Let's try that again and refresh the page. Okay, so now it's loaded again. Let's try clicking buy now. And now it redirects us to the Stripe checkout page. So I can close this because it appears to be working. And now I'll create a payment. So for Stripe, the test card is just 4242 over and over again until you have 16 digits. The expiration date just needs to be in the future. The CVC can be anything. The name can be anything. The zip can be anything. And then I click pay $99. And if it processes successfully, it should redirect me to my thank you page, which it does. Then we can look here in the address bar and we see session ID equals CS test and then the rest here. So this is where the session ID is. And inside of your thank you route, you can do something with it. You can like query the API to see what that session has, but we won't do that here. We're going to do something similar somewhere else. So now that we have that, let's go over to the dashboard and we go to payments. And here we can see a successful payment from test@test.com of $99. So that's exactly what we want. And we also see 3 other payments that are incomplete. So why would there be incomplete payments when I only tried one payment? It's because every time I create that session, it starts by creating a session that doesn't have a payment captured on it. And then when they actually pay, that's when it goes to successful. So every time I load the page, it's going to create a session for me. So if I go home, and then if I refresh the page here, we see there's another incomplete one here. So this isn't always the best way. It kind of depends on your checkout flow. If you want, you can do this using Ajax, which will generate the session right when they click the button. So let me show you how to do that now. So what I'll do is I'll create a second file called script-ajax.js. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another route. And we'll call this Stripe Pay. Right? It can be anything. So Stripe Pay. It's going to be a GET request, and it's going to return some kind of JSON data. And what I want to do is I want to move this session stuff down into this new route. So I'll just copy this, and I'll move it down here. All right, so that's the same. And I'll just comment this out up here in case you want to continue to use it. So everything is the same. And instead of returning the template, I just want to return these 2 things. So I can copy these, and it's going to be a dictionary. So let me just create that dictionary. So we're going to have checkout session ID. It's going to be a session ID. And then the public key is going to come from the config. So now if I make it look like this, I believe that should work. And now I need to call this from JavaScript. So inside of my Ajax, and first what I need to do is I need to modify this. So I have script Ajax, so I'll change this to just Ajax without the word no. And I'll also comment out this section here. So with Jinja, it's open bracket hash and hash and then a closing bracket. So this is commented out because I'm no longer going to be putting them here. It's going to be coming from Ajax. And inside of the Ajax one, I'm going to be doing something similar. So I need to get the button. So let me just copy this here. And then I'm going to add that event listener to the button, just like I did before. And let me just close it out, and the code's going to go in here. And the difference between this approach and the no Ajax approach is in the no Ajax approach, I'm initializing Stripe here because I already have the checkout public key available. And then I'm just redirecting the checkout whenever they click. But in the Ajax example, I can't initialize Stripe until I have that checkout public ID. So what I need to do here is I'm going to call fetch, and I'm going to call the route that I just created, so Stripe Pay. Then I'll call then here, and it's going to take in the results, and I need to convert that to JSON, so return results.json. So I won't really explain this too much. You have to be familiar with how fetch works, but basically I'm just performing an API request to my own app, and it's going to return the JSON data. So here it returns the data in a form that's like a string, and I'm converting it to JSON here. And then once I have the JSON here, so I'll say data, I'm going to have it available inside of this function body here. This is where I can initialize Stripe. So this data is going to have the data from the dictionary here. It's going to be a JSON object. And what I'll do is I'll just copy this. So the Stripe needs to be initialized, but instead of using checkout public key, it's going to be data.checkout public key because that's the name of the key here. So data.checkout public key. Next, I'll have the redirect to checkout stuff again. So I'll just copy all this and I'll add it down here. And the difference is instead of having checkout session here because it's a variable, what I'll do is I'll have data and then checkout session ID. Just like that. Okay, so that should be it for the Ajax one. So let's try reloading the page. And we have invalid syntax. So let's see. Yeah, this should be dictionary. So instead of equal sign, it needs to be a colon. Okay, so let's try this again. Session is not defined. So here in the render template, I need to comment out these because I'm no longer using them. And now let's try that one more time. Okay, so now I can load the page. So I just loaded it, and let's check our dashboard to see if we generated a new one. And we still just have one above here. So let me refresh the page a couple of times. One refresh, two refresh, and then I'll refresh the dashboard. And I still only see one. So we know it's not generating a session every time I refresh the page anymore. So now I'll try making a payment. And I'll say Ajax at test.com. And then 42s all around. And then something in the future. Ajax. And then let's see, pay. So it's calling the Stripe API, and it redirects back to the thank you page. Okay, and let's go back to the dashboard to verify that it's been completed. And we have a new payment, Ajax at test.com for $99. Okay, so that part is pretty simple, where you basically allow the user to give you money. But you've probably noticed that we don't have a way of confirming that the user has actually paid us. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to use the thank you page and the session ID directly from here, because the user might not always end up here. Like imagine their browser crashes after they pay, or there's some kind of malicious user. Like you can't always count on this thank you page being reached for a legitimate user. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a webhook so Stripe can send us a request telling us that there has been a successful payment. And then from there, we can do whatever process we want. So a webhook is just an endpoint in your app that some kind of automated process will send requests to whenever something happens. So in this case, for any Stripe event, it's going to send a request to our webhook. And then from there, we can handle the different events in that webhook and determine if a user has paid. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new endpoint. So let's say underneath the thanks, I'm going to have an endpoint called Stripe webhook. And this is going to be Stripe webhook again. For webhooks, they are post requests. So methods is post. And any webhook, when it's successful, just returns nothing with a 200 status response, which is the default once you return nothing in Flask. So here what I want to do is I want to actually process the webhook. And what I'll do is I'll show you it working on the command line. So I'll say webhook called. So I'm never going to call this webhook myself. It's going to be Stripe. So we'll see it on the command line when webhook is called. And now I want to process the webhook, and I'll show you the documentation for that. So if I go here, I've already confirmed, or I've already tested the integration. Now I want to go to the webhook section here, and they have an example. This is Django, but I'm using Flask. So I'll show you how to modify this for Flask. So I'll just take all this here. So this is the body of the webhook, and I'll put it here underneath my my print statement. So we need the payload. We need the signature header. We're going to start with event being none, and then we're going to do the rest of the things down here. But I'll start with what they want here. For the payload, this is the raw request information. To get that in Flask, you don't use request.body. Instead, you use request.get data, and it's a method. And first, I need to import request up here. Okay, so down here in the webhook, so this is the payload. And one thing you can do is you can check the payload length just in case someone tries to send you 100 megabytes. It should only be maybe a kilobyte or so for the webhook. So you can say request content length if it's greater than, let's say, 1 megabyte. So 1024 times 1024. What I'm going to do is I'm going to abort. So I'll say request to big, and then I'll abort 400. And I need to import abort. So we won't see this working, but anytime you use that get data method, it's a good idea to check the content length first, so you don't try to get like megabytes of data and it just runs through your memory on your server. Then we need the signature header. So to get that, it's not request.meta. It's going to be request.environ.get, then HTTP Stripe signature. And the combination of these two things, along with some endpoint secret, is going to tell Stripe whether this is legit. So I'll show you how to get the endpoint secret in just a moment, but let me indent these. So endpoint secret, let's just put that here. It's going to be a string. And let's see. So we're going to try this Stripe webhook construct event. So when it tries this with the 3 things that we're passing it here, if it works, we know that webhook actually exists, so we can verify the webhook. If it doesn't, then it's going to throw one of these errors. So I'll just move these over, and I'll convert these to Flask. So this should be something empty, and it returns the 400 status code. So I'll just print invalid payload. And then down here, likewise, instead of HTTP response, you can just pass an empty dictionary with 400 for the 400 status code. And I'll print invalid signature. And then down here, let me make sure the indentation is right. Here, this is where I'm going to handle the checkout session completed, which is the one I want. And then this fulfill the purchase we won't have. And then I already have the return 200. So now the code is completely compliant with Flask. And now to get this endpoint secret, this is where I use the command line interface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a new terminal. And I don't think I need to start a virtual environment. I'm going to use the Stripe command line tool. So it's called Stripe. Then I'm going to say listen, and then -- forward 2. So -- forward -2. And then I need to pass in the URL for my endpoint. So it's going to be 127.0.0.1 5000/Stripe_webhook. I can run that, and it's going to give me this secret. So I can just copy this and put it in here. So the reason why we're using this is because in a development environment, Stripe can't send a request to my local machine. But what it can do is it can send a request to my app through this command line interface while I'm running it. So that's why I had to do this Stripe listen. And it's going to forward all the requests to this URL that I specified. So Stripe webhook is the same as Stripe webhook here. In a production environment, what you would do instead is you would go to the dashboard and you would see the developers part, and you go to webhooks, and then you can add an endpoint for webhook, and then it's going to give you that same endpoint secret. But like I said, we're on the development server, so that doesn't make any sense. I have to use the command line tool. So now that I have all of this, what I should be able to do is I should be able to see a session when it gets created. So I'm going to print the session, and we're going to see it running after we submit our payment. So here's my app, and we're going to see these print statements fire off when I make a payment, and we'll see it happen multiple times actually. So let me go back home, and because I copied it, like the indentation is all messed up. So let's see. So line 65 is a little weird. Let's try this. And let me restart my server. Okay, so now I'll go and buy the product. Let's call this webhook@gmail.com, and then 42s. And then webhook 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so we're gonna pay. And now we're gonna look here. And if you look, we see webhook is being called multiple times. And then when we get to the webhook for the event that we're looking for, checkout session completed, we can then see the session information for that particular payment. So we see like the customer ID. We see the ID for the overall payment intent. So this payment intent is the unique payment for the user. So this is what you want to use if you're storing it in the database. So if you have like an order table, you want to store this in the order table. And for your order table, you can make this column unique, so you know you don't accept the same payment twice. And then it's just the other information relevant to this. And what I'll do is I'll show you some of it. So what you can do is you can get the line items, and that's everything that the user bought. So I'll say line items equals, it's gonna be Stripe checkout.session, and then I think it's list line items. And you can pass in a limit. The limit is going to be 1, and you also need to pass in the session ID. So session ID, just like that, is the first argument. And then what I can do is I can simply print out the value of the first one, because I know I only have one product. So line items, data, it's going to be 0, and then description, if I recall correctly. And now let me try another payment. I'll go back home, buy now. I'll say line item at test.com. 42s again. Line item, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Pay. The webhooks are going to fire. And then we see down here for the description, we have the product. So that's the product that was purchased by the user. So all this information in here, this is where you would handle the fulfillment part. So this is where you can like add it to your database, send emails telling the user that they have access to the product, or you can add it to some kind of dashboard where, you know, an employee will actually pack the order and send it to someone. Whatever the process is, this is where you would handle it. So you don't handle it on the thank you page. It's better to handle it here in the webhook, because you know it's more reliable that way. So this is the basic process of using Stripe checkout. Obviously, it can be a lot more complicated. You know, you can sell more. You can do more after the user is paid, but this is the basic overall process. And I thought I'd make this because they don't really have a good tutorial for Flask. So if you have any questions about this process, just leave a comment down below and I'll try to answer it. And that's it for this video. So if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I will talk to you next time.